What you're seeing on the screen right now comes from AIHR, and it's really calling out the difference between lagging and leading indicators. And at a high level, lagging indicators measure an outcome. Leading indicators try to predict what's going to happen. And by the way, sometimes those leading indicators, especially if you're looking at more than one, can be highly predictive. Sometimes they can't. But the more and more that you work with them, the more knowledge you're going to gain within your business itself.
I was at an organization that developed a predictive indicator around 6-month retention based on whether they had been participating in voluntary learning experiences over the last 6 months. It was about a 10-point gap between what our retention rates were for those populations. And we used that to identify if there were areas of the organization that were starting to disengage or if there were areas that hadn't been served by some of our development offerings. And so we're able to improve the organization's overall turnover rate pretty significantly by building a culture of voluntary learning and finding ways to give people access to some of those opportunities.
How do you think your talent development teams would operate differently if you prioritized predictive versus lagging indicators? What would that mean for your teams?
There wasn't an emphasis on shaping the experience and making sure that the team was actively involved and understanding that they had an impact on this. So once we sort of shifted that paradigm to understanding that number one, we had opportunities to have multiple touch points, but just more of shape what that conversation was going to be as opposed to just here's a survey waiting for something to come in. We went from having that property be one of the lowest rated ones in San Diego to the top one in the entire company.
The other thing that's important is like, and you all talked a little bit around it, but I want to emphasize the point is that there are different levels within the organization that you need to satisfy. And so, for instance, you talked about customer, you talked about the employee, you talked about the business, but there's many pieces of the business, and they all may have competing priorities or interests. And I think one of the reasons why this line of sight impact map works is you can visually display what the impact is across those lines of business and individuals and stakeholders. So they may see that they may not be so happy about what it is for them, but they can actually see, oh yeah, the amount of rework is remarkably reduced for the employee.
There are a couple of points I wanted to make around how we established, memorialized, and really got buy-in around the metrics. Very importantly, we defined the metrics. We sat down with senior leaders with the entire ELT and we walked them through what we were measuring and what we were not measuring, got their input so that we wouldn't be necessarily stuck on evaluating the metrics. And then the purpose is really important. And as you dig into the purpose of those metrics, sometimes you get ideas from leaders and others around, well, what else do we need to be looking at? This allowed us to, one, make sure we were consistent in how we were reporting, but also if we did need to make a pivot, we had a starting point so that we weren't going back and forth, thinking about, well, this is what we meant and this is what we intended to do and this is what we're actually doing now.
A couple things that I learned there was that you have to practice what you preach in your own L&D team. So oftentimes the KPI, really understanding the nuances of KPIs depends on people's other work experiences outside of L&D. We ended up hiring a couple people with PhDs that we normally don't hire at Caterpillar, so they could help us really look at, what would drive profitable growth. From looking at L&D data, look at engagement data, how can we stem a retention problem for automation, for example, with talent that's so scarce. So having the kind of talent, both broad expertise and then really deep expertise, a mix of that can help.